Well, Shalom Hadavarniks. Welcome to our Hadavar Messianic Ministry School of Biblical and Jewish Studies. We're studying the prophet Ezekiel. This is the 2022 edition. We're in session 20. And session 20 begins in chapter 20, verse 36. So let's go ahead and review where we were very quickly in our previous session. Now, our previous session, we were in the present time during the Babylonian exile, and some elders came to Ezekiel asking to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord was not going to be inquired of by them because they were idol worshippers. And then the Lord launched into a long and extended explanation of Israel's history of idol worship. So we jumped to the past. We jumped into chapter 20, verses 5 through 29. And we looked at the distant past of Israel. In the distant past, we were in Egypt. And when we were in Egypt, we worshipped idols. So God was angry with us. Then God brought us out of Egypt, into the Sinai, into the wilderness. And we continued to worship idols. And God continued to be angry with us. But He always poured out His mercy on us and did not annihilate the nation. Well, the Lord then made the Sabbath a sign between me and the sons of Israel forever, He says. And we looked at that word forever. We took a close look at that word forever. And if you want to study the Sabbath more closely, I would recommend the Messianic Bible Study Collection, the Sabbath Manuscript, 176. On page 32, Dr. Fruchtenbaum states this about the word forever. He states, the Hebrew word is olam. The word itself simply means long duration, antiquity, futurity, until the end of a period of time. That period of time is determined by the context. Very important statement there. Sometimes it is the length of a man's life. Sometimes it is an age. Sometimes it is a dispensation. When the context is God, forever is an appropriate rendering of olam. But in this situation, Exodus 3:17, the context is not God. The context is the Sabbath, Shabbat. The Sabbath is a sign between me and the sons of Israel forever. Now, in this case, we know that the Mosaic law was rendered inoperative by Yeshua in Romans 10, Galatians 2, Galatians 3, Hebrews 7, 2 Corinthians 3, Ephesians 2, and Ephesians 3. The Mosaic law is not our rule of life today. It was rendered inoperative. So a better rendering of the phrase would have been, the Sabbath, is a sign between me and the sons of Israel for an age, or for a dispensation. This would be the age or dispensation of the Mosaic law. Now, the dispensation of the law began at Mount Sinai in 1446 BC and ended at Passover in 30 AD. And that's very clearly stated in Galatians 3:19. Why the law, then, is Paul's rhetorical question. He answers the question. It was added to what? Added to the Abrahamic covenant at 1446 BC at Mount Sinai. It was added, why? Because of transgressions, and how? Having been ordained through angels by the agency of a mediator, when? Until. There's your other time indicator. It was added, that's the first time indicator, to the Abrahamic covenant in 1446 BC until 30 AD. Second time indicator, until the seed would come to who the promise had been made, and that's, of course, a reference to Yeshua. And in 30 AD, at Passover, Yeshua bled and died on the cross and was resurrected again, bringing the dispensation of the Mosaic law to a close and beginning the new covenant. Beginning the new covenant. And this was in Luke 22:20. He institutes the new covenant. In the same way, he took the cup after they had eaten, saying, this cup which is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood. And so we live under the new covenant today. It's the new covenant that is our rule of life today. So we lived in Egypt and we were idol worshippers, and God was mad at us. God brought us out with a mighty hand to Sinai. We continued to worship idols. God continued to be angry with us. And then He brought us into the land of promise, into the promised land, and we still continued to worship idols. So we now move from Ezekiel's past, the distant past, into the present time for a couple of verses with the Babylonian exile. And then we moved ahead to the tribulation in verses 33 to 38, because God has an ultimate judgment for Israel waiting in the future. And so we began to explore some of the features of the tribulation period. One of those features is the fact that Israel will experience 2 worldwide regatherings. We begin with regathering number 1. The first regathering, excuse me. The first regathering will be in unbelief, in preparation for judgment. That judgment will be the Great Tribulation, the time of Jacob's trouble. And this is explained to us in Ezekiel 20, verses 33 through 38. Also, when we get to 22, Ezekiel 22, this will be explained in verses 17 through 22, and we'll look at it in Jeremiah 30, verse 7 as well. The second worldwide gathering, and remember, the key word there is worldwide regathering. The second worldwide regathering will be in faith in preparation for blessing. And the blessing is the Messianic kingdom. And that's brought out in Isaiah 11, 11, and 12. So in verse 34, God describes this first worldwide regathering in unbelief in preparation for judgment. I will bring you out of the peoples and gather you from the lands where you were scattered, with a mighty hand and with an outstretched arm and with wrath poured out. So Israel is going to come out of a worldwide dispersion, peoples and lands, and it's going to be for wrath. And I will bring you into the wilderness of the peoples, and there I will enter into what? Into judgment with you face to face. But we also learned that while Israel was going to face judgment, she would also be provided with a refuge. And we examined that refuge, and we decided it was Bozrah. Bozrah would be the most logical place for the refuge. First of all, Bozrah is in the wilderness, just as the place of refuge is described. Secondly, Bozrah is in a mountainous area, and she's in the middle of the Mount Seir mountain range, just as described. And here's a picture of the Mount Seir mountain range. Not a huge, high mountain, but a very rugged range, and very defendable when you are in the middle of that mountain range. And then we learned that there were 3 nations that would be rescued out of the Antichrist's hands, a place of refuge. And those 3 nations would be Ammon, Moab, Edom. And guess where Bozrah is located? Bozrah is located in Edom in southern Jordan. So Bozrah is the place of refuge during the judgment of the tribulation period. Well, that brings us to the new material. And so we have reviewed the judgment of the Great Tribulation, the 2 worldwide regatherings, and the fact that the first worldwide regatherings in judgment. And so what awaits us is the tribulation period and the campaign of Armageddon. So at this point, I'd like to spend the majority of the time describing the campaign of Armageddon for you, because it is one of the major subjects during the tribulation period. So let's look at the 11 stages of the campaign of Armageddon. If you would like to delve into this in a deeper way, I would recommend very highly Footsteps of the Messiah by Dr. Arnold G. Fruchtenbaum. This is a study of Revelation and eschatology from a chronological perspective. And here is Dr. Fruchtenbaum, a very good man with an unusual gifting in exegesis. So the campaign of Armageddon. First, I'm going to chart it out for you, so hopefully that'll give you kind of a basis from where to judge. And then I'm going to map it out for you. You'll see where all the steps on the chart fit into the map and the movement of peoples and armies, etc., during the campaign of Armageddon. All right, let's begin then. The first step in the campaign of Armageddon, the Antichrist armies assemble at Armageddon. And this is in Joel 3, 9 through 11, Psalm 2, 1 through 6, Revelation 16, 12 through 16. Secondly, the second step, the Antichrist joins his army, Revelation 19, 19. Third step, the destruction of the Antichrist capital city of Babylon. We find that written about in Isaiah 13, 1 through 22, Isaiah 14, 1 and 2, and Isaiah chapters 22 and 23. Lots written about the destruction of the Antichrist capital city. Revelation 18, 1 through 24, and Jeremiah 50, 1 through 51, 64. So the destruction of Babylon. Step 4, the fall of Jerusalem. This is discussed in Zechariah 12, 1 through 3, and Zechariah 14, 1 and 2. The 5th step, the tribulation Holocaust begins. We're now in the middle of the tribulation, and this precipitates the Jewish flight to Bozrah. Matthew 24, 15 and 16. Revelation 12, 6 and 14. Isaiah 33, 13 through 16. Micah 2:12. Daniel 11:4, 11:41, and 9:27. The 6th step, the armies of the Antichrist then besiege Bozrah. Jeremiah 49, 13 and 14. The 7th step is the national regeneration of Israel. Every living Jewish man, woman, and child who survives the tribulation will be regenerated. They'll come to faith in Yeshua, and they'll be a born-again nation. Described in Hosea 6, 1 through 3, Isaiah 53, 1 through 9, Isaiah 64, 1 through 12, Romans 11, 25 through 27, Zechariah 12, 10 and 13, 9, and Joel 2, 28 through 32, and Psalm 79 and 80, the national regeneration of Israel. Step 8, the second coming of the Messiah. Lots of material on the second coming of the Messiah. Isaiah 34, 1 through 7, Isaiah 63, 1 through 6, Micah 2, 12 and 13, Matthew 24, 30, Revelation 19, 1 through 21, Jude 14 and 15, Psalm 18, Zechariah 12, 7. The 9th stage, the Messiah treads the winepress, destroying the armies of the Antichrist. This is a major feature of the campaign of Armageddon. Habakkuk 3, 1 through 19, Zechariah 14, 12 through 15, Revelation 14, 14 through 20, Revelation 19, 15, Jeremiah 49, 21, Isaiah 63, 2 through 6, and Joel 3, 13 and 14. The 10th step, the fighting ends in the valley of Jehoshaphat, Joel 3, 2, also verses 12 and 17, and then Zechariah 14, 4 and 5, 4 through 5. The final stage then, the victory ascent up the Mount of Olives, Acts 1, 9 through 11, Zechariah 14, 3 and 4. So that's a chart of the campaign of Armageddon. So let's move to our map at this point in time, and we will show you very clearly the movement of the armies in the campaign of Armageddon. So we begin in stage 1, step 1, the Antichrist armies assemble at Armageddon. Now the word Armageddon is the Hebrew word Har Megiddo. Comes into English as Armageddon, but the word is Har Megiddo, the mountain of Megiddo. And it is located right beside the Jezreel Valley in northern Israel. So all the nations of the world will send men and materiel, war supplies, to be gathered at the Jezreel Valley in preparation for the campaign of Armageddon. And here's a picture of the Jezreel Valley from Har Megiddo. I am standing on Har Megiddo, and you can see it's just a low, small rise on the and is on the southwest edge of the Jezreel Valley. And you can see the Jezreel Valley out in front of us, a huge, flat staging area for the armies of the Antichrist. And we're looking at only a small snippet of the Jezreel Valley. It's a huge place. Now, off on the left is the town of Nazareth and the Nazareth Hills. So I'm going to go over to Nazareth. We're going to take a trip over to there. I'm going to go up on the hills, on the cliff overlooking the Jezreel Valley, and we're going to turn around and take a picture back in the direction of Har Megiddo. And so here we go. Now we're standing with Nazareth to our back. Har Megiddo is in front of us, and that mountain range you see in the distance is the Mount Carmel mountain range. But here you get another look at the Jezreel Valley, huge and long and flat, a perfect staging area for the Antichrist. And the size of the Jezreel Valley can be seen here on this satellite picture. It runs from about the city of Haifa, all the way down to the Jordan Valley. Huge, flat, narrow valley that will be the staging area for the Antichrist. Now, Tel Megiddo, Har Megiddo, is located here in this approximate area. It's so small, it's very difficult to see on this satellite picture. It is that small mound of the city of Megiddo, Tel Megiddo, where the Antichrist will have his headquarters. Now, I've said to you that Babylon was the Antichrist's capital, and that is true. Babylon will be the religious, political, and economic capital of the world during the tribulation period. This is because the Antichrist will be the one world leader, one world dictator. Now that means that the city of Babylon has to be rebuilt because it's not flourishing today. And guess what? It is in the process of being rebuilt. The rebuilding was started by Saddam Hussein before he was thrown out of Iraq. And when our Marines went over there to stop Saddam Hussein's army, they had the advantage of taking photographs and visiting the rebuilding of Babylon. So this will be the tourist area, the old city, the ancient city. It'll probably be surrounded by skyscrapers and a new modern city, because that city surrounding it will be the Antichrist's political, religious, and economic capital of the world. It'll be a very, very important city to the world at the time of the tribulation. And so we come to the next step in the tribulation. The Antichrist joins his troops. He leaves his capital city and he goes to the Jezreel Valley and Har Megiddo to take personal command of his armies. This brings us to the next stage, stage 3, step 3, which is the destruction of Babylon. This is actually the first battle of the campaign of Armageddon. And we learn in Jeremiah 51, 27, and 28 that the kingdoms of Ararat, located approximately here, the kingdoms of Mini, located up to our upper right, and the kingdoms of Ashkenaz in the upper left. Actually, Ashkenaz is off the map. These three kingdoms join together. They join forces with the Medes, and they come against Babylon in a surprise attack. They don't send their armies over to the Jezreel Valley. Instead, they form together and attack Babylon. And as they do, Babylon is destroyed in the manner the Bible requires. The Bible requires that Babylon be destroyed violently and swiftly, never to rise again. Well, that has not been the case for Babylon in the past. It just kind of faded out to a ghost town, got covered up with a bunch of sand. Now it's been found again by archaeologists, and it is being rebuilt. So it awaits its final destruction in the tribulation period. Well, this brings us to the fourth stage of the campaign of Armageddon, the fall of Jerusalem. This is the second battle of the campaign. And the Antichrist does not defend his capital city. He has other prey in view, and so he sends his armies south against Jerusalem. Well, the IDF fights a magnificent battle. It's an horrific battle. The IDF does a great job trying to stop the armies of the Antichrist, but there are just too many. And eventually, after this horrific battle, Jerusalem falls to the Antichrist. This brings us to the fifth stage. The tribulation holocaust begins. This is the middle of the tribulation. The Antichrist now goes into the temple, and he declares himself to be God, desecrating the temple. And Yeshua warned us, when that happens, flee. And the Jewish people living in Jerusalem at that time will obey that command. And once they see the abomination of desolation, they will begin to flee, and they'll flee to that city of refuge, which is Bozrah. All the Jewish people that survive will flee to Bozrah in southern Jordan, ancient Edom, the place of refuge during the tribulation. And here again is that picture of Mount Seir, a very rugged mountain range. Now, Bozrah means sheepfold. That's literally what the word means. And what is a sheepfold like? Well, there's temporary sheepfolds and there's permanent sheepfolds. A temporary sheepfold the shepherd would construct out of the brush and briars and whatever around him in the land. He'll make an enclosure for his sheep. He'll drive his sheep into the enclosure, and then he'll sit down, sleep across the one entrance that he's built into this enclosure. A sheepfold has one entrance for going in and going out. And the shepherd literally becomes the door to the sheep. He lays down and sleeps in that entranceway, so nothing can get in and out without waking him up because they have to step all over him. So here's a temporary sheepfold. And here's an example of a permanent sheepfold. Again, the same idea. The shelter built for the sheep with a single entrance in and out. And of course, you also had sheepfold in the villages, and all the shepherds would drive their sheep into the sheepfold, the village sheepfold, and they would close the door. They'd keep them safe. And then in the morning, each shepherd would come and call to his sheep by name, and they would all follow out the door and follow their own shepherd. Well, why is Bozrah named sheepfold? Whoops, there's the door to the sheepfold. Why is Bozrah named sheepfold? Because it's in the middle of a canyon in the Mount Seir mountain range, and there's one key entrance in and out. And that key entrance is the Seek. This is the entry canyon into Bozrah or Petra. As you move down the Seek, you see that it's a long, mile-long twisting defile, and a squad of soldiers could hold off a battalion if they were stationed and fighting from the Seek. Very narrow and very defensible. And then finally, after a mile of walking, you come to the entry into Bozrah. And you can see a building in Bozrah appearing at the end of the Seek there. When you come out of the Seek, that building is the treasury. And you're impressed, your socks are impressed off because of its grandeur. And that's why it was built there, to impress any visitor coming into the city. And you can get an idea of the scale by looking at the people on the stairs at the bottom of the picture. See those itsy bitsy teeny weeny little people? That's a big, big doorway behind them, isn't it? Well, let's go through that doorway and turn around and see what we can see. We're in the doorway, we're looking out, and this is a picture of the Seek. We're looking at the exit from the Seek. And you can see it's just a split in the mountains that split open. God split it open from the entrance to the valley, and that's the entrance into the valley where Petra was built. Now here's an aerial view. Things don't look so impressive from the air, do they? There's the treasury, and there's some little dots down there that are the people. So here is the entrance into Bozrah. The pathway then leads over to the city itself. And you'll notice as you walk through Petra, through Bozrah, that most of the city, or a lot of the city, is carved out of the red rock of the Mount Seir mountain range. This is the urn tomb. And here is the Deir, the monastery. And again, you can get an idea of the incredible scale of these buildings by looking for the little man in the entrance. You see that entrance, the entrance to the Deir, and right in front of it there's a little white spot. You see that? That's a man standing there. Huge, huge entrance. That entrance is probably 30 feet high. So quite a magnificent place. This brings us to the 6th stage of the campaign of Armageddon. The armies of the Antichrist besiege Bozrah. The Antichrist does not want any Jewish people to escape his clutches, so he sends his armies south from Jerusalem, and they besiege the city of Bozrah in the Mount Seir mountain range. This brings us then to the 7th stage of the campaign, the national regeneration of Israel. After about 3.5 years, it becomes obvious to the Jewish people in Petra, in Bozrah, that this siege is eventually going to succeed. There's just no way out. And right about that time, God is going to pour out his Holy Spirit on the worldwide Jewish community that's still alive. They're going to come to see that Yeshua is the Messiah, and they're going to place their faith in him, and we're going to have a regenerated nation. And because of that regenerated nation, we are now going to call on him to return. Remember, he said, "You will not see me again until you say, 'Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.'" Well, we'll take that to heart, and will begin to call on him to return. And the most important group of Jewish people will probably be there in Basra. They'll probably be the leaders of the nation of Israel, the prime minister, the religious leaders, the rabbis, etc. And that's probably why they become such a target for the Antichrist. So anyway, we will call out for Yeshua to return, and by gum, he does return. That brings us to the 8th stage, which is the second coming of Messiah. He returns, and the initial point of the second coming is Basra in Edom, in modern southern Jordan. Yeshua returns to save his people. He breaks the siege around Basra, and he leads his people to safety and to freedom, and he begins to tread the winepress. Now, we have a good description of this in Micah 2:12 and 13. I will surely assemble all of you, Jacob. I will surely gather the remnant of Israel. I will put them together like sheep in the fold. Remember, the word Basra means sheepfold, but this would be better translated like a proper noun. I will put them together like sheep in Basra. So we have the place of refuge identified. Israel will be like sheep in Basra, sheep in a sheepfold. Like a flock in the midst of the pasture, they will be noisy with men. So it's going to be a crowded sheepfold there in Basra. And then this new guy is introduced, the breaker. Here we have a new individual show up. The breaker goes before them. They break out. They pass through the gate and go out by it. So this breaker breaks the siege of Jerusalem. And so the result is their king goes on before them. So the king and the breaker are the same person. And the Lord, and that's Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, the Yahweh, and Yahweh at their head. And so this is the God-man, Yeshua. He comes to the initial point of the second coming. He returns to the initial point of the second coming, which is Basra, the sheepfold. He returns there, and then he's the breaker. King Messiah breaks the siege and leads his people to safety out of the seek. And he begins to tread the winepress. Now he treads the winepress. We're now at step number 9, Messiah treads the winepress. This is the third battle of the campaign of Armageddon. Now, the winepress imagery comes from the growing and harvesting of grapes. First, grapes, of course, are harvested, and when they're nice and full of juice and red and ripe, then they're taken to the winepress, and they're tossed into the winepress. And the winepress is just a big vat, and the men stomp on the grapes and release the juice then, allow the juice to flow out of the grapes. And here's the men stomping on the grapes in the winepress, and that's a picture of judgment. And here's a modern picture of a man doing this as well. So you get a picture of what it looks like. Grapes being stomped so that the grape juice can flow freely. And so that when the Messiah treads the winepress, we're also told the area of the field of battle. And that field of battle is described in Joel 2:20. So Yeshua will leave Basra and he'll tread the winepress first to a place called Teman. Why Teman? We don't know. Nothing is specifically said about Teman. But, and I think I told you there are 3 possible locations for Teman, a northern location, a middle location, and a southern location. And I've chosen the southern location because it seems the most logical to me. And this may be where the Antichrist sets up his field headquarters. And I kind of think that's the reason, because he's one of the first casualties, if not the first casualty, of the campaign of Armageddon and the winepress of Almighty God. So Yeshua treads the winepress, crushing the enemies of the Antichrist, first of all to Teman. Then he leaves Teman and he goes into the wilderness of Paran, where Mount Paran is located. Then north through the dry and desolate Negev, crushing the armies of the Antichrist into the eastern and western sea, and then arriving at Jerusalem from the south. So there's the winepress. You can easily get a 200-mile long winepress out of this route. The end of the fighting is in the valley of Jehoshaphat. Now, some people think that the Kidron Valley is the valley of Jehoshaphat. I don't agree with them, but I do believe that Messiah will tread the winepress up the Kidron Valley to the footsteps, I should say, to the foothills, the lower slopes of the Mount of Olives. And then will come the victory ascent up the Mount of Olives. Here's the lower slopes of the mount, and Yeshua then proceeds to do a victory ascent up the Mount of Olives. And he declares victory at the top of the Mount of Olives, and the campaign of Armageddon and the wine press come to a conclusion. But remember, the initial point of the second coming is Basra or Petra, where Yeshua returns on the clouds of heaven. He left on the clouds of heaven, and the angels said he will return in the same manner. Not to the same location, but in the same manner on the clouds of heaven. Now let's take another look at this winepress doctrine and see if we can answer some questions about it. The winepress doctrine is most graphically described in Isaiah 63, verses 1 through 6. We begin with Isaiah standing probably on the Temple Mount, looking south from Jerusalem, and he sees a magnificent figure approaching him. And so he asks a question, a complicated question. Who is this who comes from Edom with garments of glowing colors from Basra? So he's got the land pinpointed, and he's got the city pinpointed. This one who is majestic in his apparel, marching in the greatness of his strength. So this is an incredible individual glowing with the colors of the Shekinah glory. The incredible figure answers, "It is I who speak in righteousness, mighty to save." So this has to be Yeshua. He's the only one who can speak and boast of being righteous and mighty to save. He's the only one that can do that. Second question by Isaiah. "Why is your apparel red and your garments like the one who treads" what? The winepress. Here we have our motif showing up. Yeshua answers, "I have trodden the wine trough alone, and from the peoples there was no man with me. I also trod them in my anger and trampled them in my wrath." Notice the picture of the men in the wine vat trampling the grapes. "I trod them in my anger and trampled them in my wrath." See the connection there? "And their lifeblood is sprinkled on my garments. I stained all my raiment." So just as the grape juice stains the raiment of those who crush the grapes, so Yeshua's raiment is stained by the lifeblood of the soldiers that he crushes. "Why? For the day of vengeance was in my heart, and my year of redemption has come. I looked, and there was no one to help. I was astonished. There was no one to uphold." See, the whole world is against Israel and Jerusalem at this point. The whole world. "So my own arm brought salvation to me, and my wrath upheld me. I trod down the peoples in my anger and made them drunk in my wrath, and I poured out their lifeblood on the earth." And that's a graphic picture of the wine press, isn't it? So the wine press doctrine comes from the growing and harvesting of grapes. They're matured, they're tossed into the wine press, and then they're crushed, which is a picture of judgment, allowing the juice to flow freely. That's the blood of the soldiers. Now here's a wine press in ancient Israel, and here we have the main vat where the grapes are thrown and then crushed by the workers, and then little rivulets are allowed to flow down into storage vats where the grape juice is not wine quite yet, where the grape juice is stored and then harvested. And so again, here is an actual wine press. This is in the Nazareth village in Galilee. Behind our guide is the wine vat itself, where the grapes were crushed, and the guide is standing in the storage vat. And between the two, there's a little channel that allows the juice to flow from the vat, from one vat into another vat. So this is where the winepress doctrine comes from. We continue looking at the winepress doctrine in Revelation 14:20. And the winepress was trodden outside the city, and the blood came out from the winepress up to the horses' bridles for a distance of, so there's a very huge bloodletting. It's for a distance of 200 miles, says the NASB and the Amplified. And that, I think, is the most accurate measurement of the winepress. Other versions say 180 miles. The New Living Translation, a little shy. 1,600 stadia, the NIV, the RSV, the ESV, and the Amplified. But this kind of obscures the distance for the English reader, or for the American reader anyway. And then the King James, the ASV, and the New King James say 1,600 furlongs. Again, kind of obscuring the distance for someone who doesn't know what a furlong is. And then there's various interpretations regarding what the winepress actually is. And many of them. One person in the Expositor's Bible Commentary says that it's hyperbole only. Now, what's hyperbole? Hyperbole is exaggeration for effect. So he's saying that God is just exaggerating for effect here. It's really not going to be as bad as it's described. Any other position is speculation, he says. So this is hyperbole only, symbolic only. And then, is it literal? Many think it's literal, like I do. That it's literal means that it may designate the area of judgment around the city of Jerusalem. Well, that's incorrect, because it's around the city of Bozrah that judgment occurs. Third, the site of the carnage extends approximately 200 miles. Well, the Believer's Bible Study is getting the idea here, but they don't tell you what's the beginning and end of that 200 miles. Fourth, it is so difficult a business, nothing can be positively determined. That's poor Matthew Poole. He's overwhelmed by the prophecy here. Of course, he's an older commentator. Fifthly, the winepress is the distance from Bozrah to Megiddo. Well, kind of close. It shouldn't take it all the way up to Megiddo, however. That's the King James Bible Commentary. The Albert Barnes notes, he says 200 miles square, a lake of blood. Well, if you know the topography of Israel and Jerusalem, you know there's no 200 square mile lake going to fit there. 7, the approximate distance from Armageddon in the north to Edom in the south. Well, he's getting the idea. MacArthur is getting the idea in the MacArthur Study Bible, but again, he starts from Armageddon. 8th interpretation. The distance itself covers the length of Palestine, but it is more likely that the metaphor is worked out with the exuberance of apocalyptic symbolism. That's by Sweat. Apocalyptic symbolism for the whole earth. So A.T. Robertson likes Mr. Sweat's position, but that is simply symbolism. The ninth position, the blood from the slaughter will flow from Armageddon, 180 miles, an enormous river of blood. Where there, Dr. Ryrie is pretty close, but again, he starts at Armageddon, which I don't believe is the correct place to start. The 10th, perhaps there may be an allusion to the measure of the land of Israel and the common notion of it among the Jews, who make it to be the square of 400 parsecs. And that's John Gill, and he's again an older commentator as well. The 11th position, 1,600 is a square number, 4 by 4 by 100. So he thinks this speaks of the four corners, north, south, east, and west of the Holy Land, or else of the world. So he thinks this winepress is just a symbol for the world. The completeness and universality of the worldwide destruction being hereby indicated. And that's Jameson, Fawcett, and Brown, taking a symbolic position. 12th, the 200 miles may refer to the entire area from the Valley of Armageddon to Bozrah, which is about 200 miles. And again, I don't think the Valley of Armageddon is a good place to start. Another possible explanation is that it refers to the round-trip distance between Jerusalem and Bozrah. And this is Dr. Fruchtenbaum's comments in Footsteps of the Messiah. And I would even disagree a little with him as well. As the Messiah treads the winepress, if you make it go from the Jezreel Valley, Armageddon, down to Bozrah. If you take a straight line, and a straight line is the shortest distance between 2 points, you come up with 180 miles, which is a little too short for the winepress. And you shouldn't use the Jezreel Valley either, because no fighting occurs in the Jezreel Valley. The Jezreel Valley is simply the staging area. No battle occurs there. The battle begins in Jerusalem. So you need to start in Jerusalem and ignore the distance from Jerusalem to the Jezreel Valley. Now, if you do that and you use a straight line, you come up with 140 miles, which is again a little short from what you want to do. So I don't think these explanations are really the best explanations. I think we need a little bit more additional information in order to kind of nail down what the wine press is actually like. So let's pick on Habakkuk 3:3. In Habakkuk 3:3 we read that God comes from Teman and the Holy One from Mount Paran. Selah, his splendor covers the heavens. The earth is full of his praise. So this is the second coming. Obviously, the Shekinah glory is covering the heavens and the earth. But we notice 2 locations, Teman and Mount Paran, and I've accounted for them. There's Teman, that's where I believe the Antichrist first goes, and Mount Paran is in the wilderness of Paran. So Paran and Teman are in the exact location of Bozrah. Everything fits so far. Joel 2:20. Context is the second coming. But I will remove the northern army far from you. That will be the Antichrist army coming down from Jerusalem, from Megiddo, and down to Jerusalem, and then down south to Bozrah or Petra. And I will drive it into a parched and desolate land. So we need a parched and desolate land. And its vanguard into the eastern sea, its rear guard into the western sea, and its stench will rise, and its foul smell will come up, for it has done great things. All right, so what do we need now? We need a parched and desolate land, and guess what? We have one. It's the Negev desert, just south of Jerusalem, and north of the wilderness of Paran, the Negev desert. Parched and desolate, I think you would agree with that. Parched and desolate, I think you would agree with me. We have a parched and desolate land. So we're in good shape there. But we also need an eastern sea. Well, the Dead Sea would qualify for that. And we also need a western sea. And the Mediterranean would qualify for that. So we've got everything in place. We can understand the field of battle from Joel 2:20. This is the field of battle. Joel 2:20 again. But I will remove the northern army from you, and I will drive it into a parched and desolate land, its vanguard into the eastern sea, and its rearguard into the western sea. Now, in 2 Thessalonians 2:8, we read, Then the lawless one, that is the Antichrist, will be revealed, whom the Lord will slay with the breath of his mouth and bring to an end by the appearance of his coming. So God is going to destroy the Antichrist physically. He's going to end up spiritually in the lake of fire, but physically he's going to be killed and brought to an end when Yeshua appears, early on. Then we read in Revelation 19:20, and the beast was seized, that's him, that's the Antichrist, and with him the false prophet who performed the signs in his presence, by which he deceived those who had received the mark of the beast and those who had worshipped the image. And these two were thrown alive into the lake of fire, which burns with fire and brimstone. So that the Antichrist gets killed, then resurrected, and then they're thrown forever into the lake of fire for eternity. So as we look at the winepress again, we see the Messiah treading the winepress south to Teman, killing the Antichrist more than likely, destroying the Antichrist, and then heading down into the Negev, into the wilderness of Paran, where Mount Paran is, north into the Negev, pushing the armies of the Antichrist into the eastern and western sea, and then approaching Jerusalem from the south. And the end of the fighting is in the valley of Jehoshaphat. And again, like I said, some people think this is the valley of Jehoshaphat. And again, I disagree with them. I think that Yeshua will tread the valley of the Kidron, but he will do it, but that's not the valley of Jehoshaphat. He will come to the lower slopes of the Mount of Olives. Now, here are some pictures of the Kidron Valley. This is taken from the Temple Mount, or just below the Temple Mount. I don't believe this will be the valley of Jehoshaphat. And here's another picture taken halfway down the Kidron Valley. This is not the valley of Jehoshaphat. This is from, turned around, and I'm looking back up the Kidron Valley. Here is the temple, corner of the temple, and here is the Mount of Olives. So here's some shots of the Kidron Valley, but this is not the valley of Jehoshaphat. Now we're on the western slopes of the Mount of Olives, where all the graveyards are, looking at the valley of Jehoshaphat. Looking at the Kidron Valley. And many Jewish people are buried there because they feel that Messiah will come to the temple and they'll be the first to be resurrected. So they believe in resurrected. They want to be buried on the Mount of Olives. It's a huge graveyard. This is the Hinnom Valley from the Mount of Olives, right there. The Hinnom Valley runs into the Mount of Olives at the southernmost point of Jerusalem. And this is the Temple Mount from the Mount of Olives. So that's a picture of the territory around the Mount of Olives. And Zechariah 14:4-5 says, on that day his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which is in front of Jerusalem on the east. And the Mount of Olives, and now we learn in Zechariah 14, and the Mount of Olives will be split in its middle from east to west by a very large valley. And so that half the mountain will move toward the north, and the other half toward the south. And you will flee by the valley of my mountains, for the valley of the mountain will reach to Azael. This is some new and interesting additional information. Then the Lord my God will come, and all the holy ones with him. So this is obviously the second coming. Yeshua returns with the armies of heaven and with the church. Now, this again, like I said, this is the Kidron Valley, which is the traditional location of the valley of Jehoshaphat. But I think there's an alternative, and that's an earthquake fault that runs east and west through the Mount of Olives, and if it splits, it'll cause the Mount of Olives to move north and another half to move south. Well, let's take a look at this aerial photograph. Here we have the Temple Mount. That's the Dome of the Rock right there. To the east is the Mount of Olives, located here. And in between is the Kidron Valley, which is the Kidron Valley. Now, the alternative to the Kidron Valley is the earthquake fault. And you can see the earthquake there, earthquake fault running into the Mount of Olives, east and west. Now, I'm standing at this viewpoint, and I'm aiming my camera to the south and taking a look at the earthquake fault. So here we are. I'm at this viewpoint, and this is the earthquake fault running east and west. And earthquake faults are predictably very straight in nature, and you can see that that little valley is very straight in nature. And now I've backed my telephoto off. You can see the lower slopes, the eastern lower slopes of the Mount of Olives on the right, and here is that same earthquake fault heading right for the Mount of Olives. And now I'm going to zoom in to this area, and again, this is the earthquake fault running into the Mount of Olives, and you can see the lower slopes of the Mount of Olives in the lower right corner of the picture with the road running around it. Now, I said to you, earthquake faults are very straight, and here's an example. This is the San Andreas Fault, a very famous fault in California, and notice how straight it is. It's almost like a straight line. It's not like a ruler or anything, but it is a very, very straight geological feature. And that's exactly the way the earthquake fault we just looked at is. So, Yeshua will take a victory ascent up the Mount of Olives, and he will declare victory on the Mount of Olives. There's no problem with that. It may be on the south side of the valley, it may be on the north side of the valley. We'll just have to see what actually happens. So as we get to Ezekiel 20:36, we now pick up Ezekiel chapter 20 where we left off last session. We pick it up in verse 36, and we have the fact that the the campaign of Armageddon, etc., is similar to the Exodus. Here's what he says. Here's what God says. As I entered into judgment with your fathers in the wilderness of the land of Egypt, so I will enter into judgment with you, declares the Lord. So the simile is entering into judgment in the wilderness of the land of Egypt. Now, the wilderness of the land of Egypt would be Kadesh Barnea. Kadesh Barnea, located right here, was the place we refused to obey God and we refused to enter the promised land. And so the judgment, all those over 20 years of age and older were to die in the wilderness except Joshua and Caleb. So we wandered in the wilderness, and here's this area. We wandered in this area for 40 years until the Exodus generation died. And a new nation was born as free men in the wilderness, and they entered the promised land. The rebels had been purged. And so this is where the simile also occurs. I will enter into judgment with you, says the Lord, and that judgment will be the great tribulation, and the rebels will be purged. And we see the purging of the rebels in Zechariah 13, verses 8 and 9. It will come about in all the land, declares the Lord, that 2 parts in it will be cut off and perish, but the third will be left in it. And I will bring the third part through the fire and refine them as silver is refined and test them as gold is tested. 2/3 of the worldwide Jewish community will be rebellious. They will be purged. 1/3 will be left. They will be submissive to Yeshua, and they will become the believers in Yeshua. They will call on my name. There they are, they're believers in Yeshua, and I will answer them, and he will come. They'll call for him to return. He will return. And I will say, the result now, they are my people. They're born-again believers. And they will say, the Lord is my God. Rather than rejecting him, they will be affirming him. But 2/3 will die as rebels, and they'll be purged. And the aim then is in verse 37. I will make you pass under the rod, and I will bring you into the bond of the covenant. I'll cause you to pass under the rod. This is the rod of judgment. Now the rod is a metaphor for counting. The sheep pass single file under the shepherd's rod so he may count them and separate them. Count them and separate them. And some are going to be purged, and some, 1/3, are going to be brought under the bond of the covenant. The covenant. Now, which one? He doesn't say which covenant this will be. There are 2 possible covenants this could be. The first one would be possibly the land covenant, and that total program is listed in Deuteronomy 29 and 30. So let's just list the highlights of Deuteronomy 29 and 30. First of all, Israel is judged in the tribulation in verses 19 through 28. Then Israel is scattered all over the world. And then Israel is regathered once Yeshua comes, regathered from all over the world, and Israel has been purged in verse 6. So this is the land covenant, and it outlines the end of the campaign of Armageddon. But it's probably not the best covenant to look at. The best covenant is probably the new covenant. That's probably the one in view here, Jeremiah 31 to 34. This covenant is most likely because the contents of Ezekiel 20 emphasizes the regeneration of Israel and the purging of the rebels. And the essence of the new covenant is personal spiritual salvation. So that would coordinate better with Ezekiel chapter 20. And it also is a simile with the Exodus. Jeremiah 31 and 32 again. Behold, days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. Not like the covenant which I made with their fathers in the day I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, my covenant which they broke. So the simile is there's covenants involved in both experiences. my covenant which they broke, although I was a husband to them, declares the Lord. So we have that similarity as well. Then we come to Ezekiel 20:38, which describes the purging of Israel. And I will purge from you the rebels and those who transgress against me. I will bring them out of the land where they sojourn, and they will not enter the land of Israel. Thus you will know that I am the Lord. So the purpose of the judgment is to purge out the rebels and transgressors. So the point here is purification of the nation, not annihilation of the nation. He wants to clean the nation up and get the rebels out of the nation. And then he summarizes the purification. I will bring them out of the land where they sojourn, but they will not enter the land of Israel. And the land of Israel there, refers to the millennial or messianic Israel under King Messiah. Well, why will these men and women not enter the land of Israel? Why will the rebels not enter there? Well, that's Zechariah 13:8 and 9. It will come about in all the land, declares the Lord, that 2 parts in it will be cut off and perish, but the third will be left in it. That's the purging of the rebels. And I will bring the third part through the fire. That is the faithful remnant. I will refine them as silver is refined, and test them as gold is tested. They will call on my name. I will answer them. I will say they are my people, and they will say the Lord is my God. So the rebels and transgressors comprise 2/3 of the worldwide Jewish nation. And the 1/3 that's left enters into the land of the kingdom, into Israel itself for the kingdom. And in verse 39 now we come to a warning to the present generation. As for you, O house of Israel, thus says the Lord God, go, serve everyone his idols, but later you will surely listen to me, and my holy name you will profane no longer with your gifts and your idols. So here we change time frames. We're in the tribulation. We now jump back in one verse here to Ezekiel's present time, verse 39. God is talking to Ezekiel's generation here in contrast to the future generation that accepts the Lord. And God lets Ezekiel's generation go their own way. God gives Ezekiel's generation over to their own sin. Serve your idols. And do that for succeeding generations is basically the thought. So God has let us go from the time that Yeshua came until the present day. He's allowed Israel to go their own way. And that word later in verse 39 covers the times of the Gentiles, from the present day, Ezekiel's present day, all the way through to the second coming. We are going to anger Israel the whole time, and we do. And one of the greatest insults is when we reject the Messiah. So he says, go to it, but don't think you'll get away with it. God will judge. My holy name you will no more profane with your gifts and your idols. Now remember Romans chapter 1, verses 20 through 27. This is exactly what God does to the world that rejects Yeshua. Here we read in Romans 1, 20 through 27, professing to be wise, this is the world, the people in the world, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the form of corruptible man and of birds and four-footed animals and crawling creatures. So we reverted to idolatry. Therefore God gave them over to the lusts of their hearts to impurity. That's the first time Paul says this, so that their bodies would be dishonored among them. So he said, go ahead and do it. If you want to reject me, reject me. For they exchanged the truth of God for a lie. That's a rejection of God. And they worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. For this reason, what? God gave them over to degrading passions. You want to act like that? Go ahead and see what it gets you. For their women exchanged natural function for that which is unnatural. And in the same way, the men abandoned the natural function of the woman and burned in their desire toward one another. Men with men committing indecent acts and receiving in their own persons the due penalty of their error. And just as they did not acknowledge to see fit to acknowledge God any longer, God gave them over to a depraved mind to do the things which are not proper. And I'm afraid that describes the state of our world today. We're walking further and further away from God and further away from Jesus, and it shows. People are doing things which are not proper from God's point of view, to say the least. All right. I'm out of time. I'm out of time here. And so we'll pick it up next session in verses 40 through 44 as we examine the kingdom. We're going to take a look now at the end of the times of the Gentiles and the institution of the Messianic kingdom. You're going to find this to be a fascinating and wonderful section of the book of Isaiah. The book of Ezekiel. The book of Ezekiel. Thanks for being our students. We're very grateful you want to study the Bible with us. Thank you, and Lahitraot. See you later. Lahitraot.